branch. I am delighted to welcome Mr. William Schmick on Solutions Rising. Mr. Schmick has had an impressive career on Wall Street as a research analyst and strategist for a variety of brokerage firms before moving to the next chapter of his life as an investment advisor. Presently, he writes a weekly column on monetary conditions that affect all of our lives. Welcome, Mr. Schmick. Phil, if I may. And as I start out each program, I ask my guest, would you please tell whatever you would like about your background, your heritage, whatever you like.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm delighted.
I'm a dinosaur. Okay, I've been in the financial business since 1981. It's a business of high stress, and usually by the time you're 40 or 50, you've retired. I'm still going, and I love it.
That's why you're still going.
Yes. And in addition, I have been a writer for almost as long as I've been a financial person. Okay, again, that's another love. And I've been able through the years, and we're talking well over 40 years, to combine the two loves. And it's what keeps me going. Mm-hmm. So on a daily basis, I'm sitting at a computer with a big screen and watching and trading the markets from 8:30 in the morning till 4:30. And I find the time over that each week to write two columns that go out to several newspapers and other media sources around the country. One is usually an eclectic piece on something to do with business or finance. And the other is a market column in which I talk about the markets each week, what happened, and where they're going. And because I'm telling my readers where they're going, I'm a bit of a fortune teller.
Oh, I see that in your columns.
Yes.
Prophetic, especially going back to 2010 and 2012.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yes. I've got a pretty good track record. Mm-hmm. And of course, imagine if you've been in the business like I have for 40 or 50 years, you've seen a lot. In fact, there's very little that you haven't seen. And history doesn't repeat itself, but as you know, history rhymes. And it is rhyming today. So that's a little bit about what I've done. I've traveled the world many, many times. And in my financial career, I've spent about 50% of that time in the United States and the other half overseas.
Where overseas?
Mostly countries that you would call emerging markets. Sure, I've been to France, I've been to Japan, I've been to London times. But the exciting part was being in Africa or watching as the Berlin Wall was torn down.
Oh my goodness, I remember that.
Yes, or being...
And I lived in North Africa for 2 years.
You did?
Yes,
okay.
That's another story.
Right. I've been in Latin America during the lost decade of the 1980s. On and on. I've been in every gold and silver and copper mine probably in the world of any size. So all of that is kind of broadened my horizon, and it has given me an understanding of how markets and countries interact and how things change. And I can see and have seen things that has happened in the Ivory Coast happening in Hong Kong and vice versa and so forth. So it gives me a kind of unique perspective, and I try to write that in my columns.
Oh, I love to read your columns. What, when you say history doesn't repeat itself, mm-hmm. but it rhymes?
Yes.
How do you differentiate that?
Well, let's take a great example. Welcome to the presidential elections of 2024. I've just finished a 4-column or 5-column topic on populism in this country. And
And I really would like to, I think we'll accent on populism on this program.
Okay.
With the expectation that I will be inviting you as a guest again.
Okay. Well, I see a lot of similarities today in what is occurring in this country with other periods in the United States. I firmly believe that we are in the second or third year of a regime change. A period of populism. And when I've looked back through history, the United States history, these periods last anywhere from 15 to 20 years. So we're in very early innings in a situation which I continue to see will provide conflict and stress and confusion as it has in the past.
Do you have a sense of foreboding?
I did. I really did. In the last couple of years, okay, when Trump was in and then when Biden was in, I was kind of afraid to see Trump come back in, and given all that's happened to the markets and all the things that had happened in the past and January the 6th and all the rest, and I guess because of that fear, I started to research because I didn't understand what was happening in the country. So to me, it was the great unknown. And by working and looking back through our history, I've developed a perspective of what's happening, which gives me comfort, believe it or not, in the sense that I'm old enough to remember the 60s. And I suspect you are too.
Yes, I'm 82, so yes,
okay.
I definitely
And I'm
do.
76, so we know the 60s, we're still here, we're thriving, but my God, the 60s, for those who weren't around, the 60s were full of assassinations,
lost all our leaders,
marches, the Vietnam War, and inflation through the 70s into OPEC and so forth and so on. It was a tumultuous time, and it was a period of populism. We didn't realize it at the time. I mean, I spent almost 2.5 years in Vietnam as a Marine, and came back and marched against the war and all the rest of the things that went on. But it was a terrible, terrible time. And yet, in the end, it was a time in which solutions to the conflicts, to the unhappiness, to the populism started to percolate up. But it took a whole bunch of new leaders to do that.
For our audience, how do you define populism?
Populism is, for me, is a movement where the majority of people are dissatisfied with not only the economy, but the political system. They feel that they have not participated in the benefits of their political economic system. And we can go back, to the founding fathers. That was a period of populism. It was basically the British Empire, okay? We were a colony. We were not treated fairly. We were taxed, okay? We didn't see where we were getting a great deal of benefits. Now, our founding fathers, when we revolted, came up with a constitution extremely aware of their unhappiness with the British Empire. What they were smart enough to see is that there was this pendulum which swung back and forth in political systems. And they devised a constitution that would check a pendulum swinging too far to the right or to the left. And what do I mean by the pendulum and right and left? On one hand we'll talk about economics, free markets, capitalism. Okay, that was what the British Empire was. And capitalism in the end, is a feeling of winner take all, dog eat dog, survival of the fittest. Okay? It has benefits. It has great benefits. Look at what happened in the British Empire. So we wanted a capitalistic system. Okay? But our fathers realized early on that this capitalistic system, without checks and balances, could move to the extreme, we'll call it the right, to the point where very few people benefited from the system. So they had to devise checks and balances because they certainly believed in qualities like equity, fairness, truthfulness, okay? Justice, okay? So we devised a system here in America where when the pendulum swung too far to the right or too far to the left, okay, these checks and balances would start to move it back. And these checks and balances is us.
Yes.
We are the checks and balances. So, what do we have today? We simply have the checks and balances finally moving after many years from where it has gone to, the extreme right, okay, where a handful of billionaires own more of the world's wealth than half the people in the world. I would call that an extreme.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, and that's where we have finally ended up. And the movement of populism is simply the people of this country, the checks and balances, to move once again that pendulum from an extreme one position to at least the middle.
I'm very concerned about the dissipation of the checks and balances and what's happening. Frankly, I'm concerned that we might be collapsing from within, and I really believe in fighting on the local level going up, and of course it goes back to watching Reaganomics trickle down, just policies that I thought were just awful.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. Well, you have a right to be afraid, although I will tell you in the periods of populism, and there have been many in this country, there is only one time where the system broke down in the way that you fear, and that was the Civil War. In that Civil War, it was basically an argument over slavery, at least on the surface, but it really wasn't.
No,
it was about the South, who believed that they had built an economy, an agrarian economy, on the backs of slaves. And on the northern side, where the industrialization of the country was going, they, in fact, were the power holders of the economy and were growing faster and larger than the South. So the North threatened the economic future of the South by saying that we want no more slavery in this country. Neither side would compromise.
But the North was also using the benefits of slavery economically.
They were, but the industrialization of the North was growing so strongly and with leaps and bounds that it was overcoming the agrarian society of the South. Okay, so was there ability to compromise? There probably was, okay, in some shape, way, or form, but it took on a moral argument. Okay, do you believe in God or do you not? Do you believe in slavery or do you not? Okay, and since that was an area where compromise, there was no compromise. That we could call slavery was the pendulum pushing as far to the right as you possibly can get, right? And there was no willingness because the South was afraid that if they got rid of slavery, their economy would be annihilated. So they refused to compromise. And the North didn't either.
But also, I think in a lot of American education and understanding, it's either or, instead of finding all the complexities in the solutions and ways to heal and avoid probably what happened in the Civil War,
Yes.
and perhaps what's happening here.
The thing is that outside of that one example, in periods of populism, compromise has developed. It's taken a long time, and unfortunately, when I say this, the only way a compromise or compromises are going to occur in this country now is through stress, strife, and conflict.
And somehow I think we need to find consensus.
We can't do that yet.
Compromise, no, we cannot.
Yet. This is year 2 or 3
Out of
15
20.
or
50.
20.
Okay.
Okay. Now, what is it going to take? I believe honestly, that neither candidate right now has the solutions or ideas. To fast forward really quickly, how do we get into this situation? The argument I have developed was that both the Federal Reserve Bank and the federal government decided back in the 90s that they'd figured out a way to keep the economy growing and to alleviate those periods where we had these disastrous recessions or huge moves where the economy would go like this. Mm-hmm. They decided together, basically the Federal Reserve and the government, that if they poured money into the system sort of at the first hint of a recession, okay, that they could slow or reduce the severity of that recession. And at the same time, when things were partying and everybody got hot and the markets were rolling, if they reduced the amount of money into the system, it could slow down the growth and we wouldn't have like the crash of 29 or any of that, or the depressions or whatever. So they did that. Okay, they were really working at making the economy in this country more acceptable, less unemployment at times, okay, less inflation, the whole deal. The means by which they did this was the mistake. And what do I mean? You're pouring money into the economy, you're the Federal Reserve, okay, or you're the government that's spending, all right? You turn on the spigot. Where does that money go? It doesn't drop out of a helicopter, okay? It goes into the banking system, reduces interest rate to the point where money's free. Or to borrow money is so low that it's almost free. Now, question to you. If interest rates are really low and you can go to a bank and borrow as much money as you want, who gets the right or the opportunity to borrow the most?
Well, I know that from your columns, and I know that also personally. It's the people with the most wealth and the corporations
Yes.
with the strongest. They've
Yes.
got giant.
Yes.
I mean, that brings us right to Citizens United, the Supreme Court, making corporations people. One of the most disastrous decisions I've seen out of the Supreme Court. Of course, Roe v. Wade is probably the most disastrous. But anyway, yes, right there.
Right. Now, that makes sense from an economic point of view. Why? Because corporations are only motivated to make profits for the shareholders. Okay? Now, back in the Reagan days, everybody knew this, and we were saying, but what about me? I don't own a corporation. I am not a corporation. How do I get the money? Don't worry. It'll trickle down to you over time. Corporations will borrow the money, they'll build new plant and equipment, they'll hire more people, they'll need more people, so they'll raise wages, trickle down, trickle down, trickle down. It had worked at times in our history, for sure. Why didn't it work 40, 50 years ago? Here's the answer. Corporations 40 or 50 years ago, actually 40 years ago, started to realize that if they invested this money, this free money that the Fed and the government was giving them, overseas, the wages overseas were much cheaper, building plant and equipment overseas was much cheaper, and there was a global war on between all corporations around the world to invest overseas and build their businesses outside of their countries. So the U.S., for example, instead of investing in plant and equipment here in this country, they put that money into China.
Which was what the stock market was supposed to be, was to raise money for companies so that they could be secure and grow and take care of their employees.
You see, but that's
the difference.
And the thing is that that stock market, okay, well, the problem with that was that small companies couldn't compete in China.
No.
Okay, because we were up against BP or Sumitomo Bank or whatever in other countries. So the bigger our companies got, the better able they were to compete overseas. And after all, you want American companies to succeed, and raise the flag and so forth and so on. So our politicians 40 some years ago said, this is great. We've figured out a way. We'll give the money to the corporations through the Federal Reserve, making money cheaper and cheaper, and we'll spend money. The government will spend taxpayers' money by whatever, social programs, whatever. But where did the government give that money? It didn't go directly to you or me. It went to a corporation.
Yep.
Now, the corporation who, let's say it was an infrastructure project that would build highways, they realized that buying cement overseas with the government spending money was cheaper than buying it here. So both the federal government and the Federal Reserve were using a top-down approach to stimulate the economy or to slow it down.
And all it did was hurt the everyday people, the working people, shove the middle class down to poverty.
No trickle down. It didn't occur because these corporations were taking the money overseas. It occurred for the Chinese, okay? Their middle class, suddenly there was a middle class there, and many, many other countries. So, it wasn't that the government was being bad. It was literally trying, okay, to smooth the economy and hire people and so forth and so on. But it wasn't working, and they still don't recognize that it's not working. We spent, over the Trump-Biden eras, $9 trillion of spending, okay? And people today are angry. They're still angry because these policies of the last 40 years, this top-down approach, does not work. Our income inequality is higher than it was during the colonial period. When we had a revolution.
I didn't realize that.
Yes, it's higher today. So, my argument is we need new economic policies that neither party nor candidate understand, okay? And I don't see any players yet that have come up that have the kind of policies we're going to need to redistribute all these trillions of dollars that has gone to 10% of the country and left the other 90% angry and disenfranchised.
As we're coming, I'm sure we're getting to the closing time. I guess I would ask you for a final thought and what you feel is hope.
Okay.
Is that a fair question?
Fair. Final thoughts. Here's the solution. You won't hear it from anybody in Washington. So a suggestion. Everyone who's making $100,000 or less pays no federal, state, or local taxes. Everybody that's earning $100,000 or less has free health care. They go to the private health care system, okay, and go to their doctors, the family does, and they pay nothing. Have you heard this from anyone? Oh my God. But that's the kind of policies that will redistribute the wealth. The only successful effort to redistribute health was the check we all got for $2,300 during COVID. It went directly to us.
Yes.
I'm not saying that doing this is going to be the most efficient use of government spending. It isn't. and it's going to be somewhat inflationary. It's going to slow growth in this country, but you were afraid of what might happen if there isn't a compromise. That's the alternative. Now, I don't want to do this. I'm sure no one else wants to do this, but there are things that we have to do in order to redistribute this wealth. Mm-hmm. So we will, because we've done it before. Look, the Civil War, what happened? Terrible war and so forth, but yet 20% of the workforce, the slaves, were freed. 20% of the workforce. In the Great Depression, out of all that populism and turmoil, what happened? We got the New Deal. Today it's still going on. In the 60s and 70s, same thing. What happened? We got the Great Society. Mm-hmm. This time around, who knows what it'll be, but it will be, and it's an opportunity, in a way, to move that pendulum back to the center. And I believe we'll do it.
If we have time. And of course, I'm a climate catastrophe fighter.
Yes.
And very concerned about what is happening. And that affects everybody economically,
Absolutely.
Wherever you live, however you live. And also nuclear proliferation and it's not so far out to think about nuclear war. I mean, these are two very, very serious issues.
Well, that's part of the stress. We may not have another Vietnam War this time around, but we may have a climate war.
We already have a climate.
Well, I agree with you, but this is nothing. And by the 30s, by 2030, okay, what we're going through now is going to look like nothing. Mm-hmm. Okay, by 2030, you won't believe what's going to happen in this country. But the hardships can be terrible. This is going to cause stress. This is going to cause conflict. But it's also going to bring us together. Because we'll have no choice.
Yes.
Okay?
Oh, yes. And that does happen in disasters or crises or catastrophes.
And that's the only way this is going to happen. Yeah. Because you and I are not going to part with one dime unless we're forced to. Okay? Mm-hmm. The haves in this country have it. Why should they give to have-nots? Why, if I paid for my college education, should I allow your daughter to go to college for free? Why? Oh, because it's fair. Okay? You're right. Back to the pendulum, okay? People like me, and I'm using the general me, people like me do not want to part with our gains, especially if we're retired. That's a real threat, okay? But that's exactly what's necessary unless we want the alternative. And we're already getting that alternative. If you, whether it's in the elections or climate change, why do you think that people in Pennsylvania, in the face of climate change, absolutely do not believe it and want energy, more energy, fuel-burning energy in this country? Why? Because in Pennsylvania, in parts of Pennsylvania, their only livelihood is energy, okay? Producing energy. And nobody has given them an alternative to feed their family of four.
And we could with solar and wind. And we're going to close there. Bill Schmick, I am so grateful. I expect and hope you will come back and continue our discussion because there is so much to talk about. And if each one of us picked up one problem and solved it, imagine the incredible view we would all have of solutions rising. Please be part of the solution. Thank you.